My older sister died on a Tuesday in March. Brain aneurysm. She was 50 years old. She was at her desk at the nonprofit where she had been the senior program director for 11 years. Her assistant found her at 4 in the afternoon. She had been on a phone call at 3:42. The medical examiner said she had been gone within 90 seconds. 7 months later, after I had been given temporary administrative access to her email account by her husband, who was a kind man, a high school music teacher who could not face the inbox alone, I sat at my kitchen table on a Saturday afternoon in October and read 23 years of correspondence between my sister and our parents. There were approximately 1,400 emails in the folder she had labeled simply, family. It took me 11 hours. I did not eat. I did not get up. By the time I closed the laptop at 1 in the morning, I had been my own sister's project, in a quiet and consistent way, since I was 21 years old. My name is Margaret Lawson. Everyone calls me Maggie. I am 44 years old. I am a school psychologist at a public middle school in Cleveland, Ohio. I have been married to a kind man named Tom for 18 years. We have 2 children, a 15-year-old son named David, and a 12-year-old daughter named Lily. I want to tell you a story today that I am still, 2 years later, trying to set down without bitterness, because the person at the center of it is dead, and she cannot answer for what she did. And I have decided that the cleanest thing I can do with what I learned is tell the story plainly. Name the pattern for anyone listening who is living inside one, and then let the rest of it be. Let me tell you what I thought I knew before that Saturday. My sister Karen was 6 years older than me. She was the kind of older sister who, from the time I was a little girl, was held up as the family standard. She got good grades. She made the right friends. She married a good man at 26. She gave our parents 2 grandchildren before she was 35. She lived 20 minutes from them. She organized every Thanksgiving and every Easter. She drove our father to his cardiologist appointments after his heart attack in 2018. She was, by every visible measure, the kind of daughter who showed up. I had always known, in the small, uncomfortable way you know these things, that I was not that daughter. I had moved out of Cleveland for college at 18. I had come back, but on my own terms. Tom and I had bought a house on the west side, an hour from my parents. I had become a school psychologist, which my mother had once described to a neighbor at a barbecue, in my hearing, as Maggie's interesting little career. I had married Tom, who my parents had been polite to, but never warm with. I had been told, gently and consistently for the last 2 decades, that my mother worried about me, that my father did not understand my choices, and that Karen was the one who explained me to them. Karen, my sister had told me on many occasions, was the one who reminded our parents that I loved them in my own way. I had believed her. I had thanked her. I had felt, at every family gathering, a small, low-grade guilt about being the kind of daughter who needed defending. I had also felt, beneath the guilt, a small confusion that I could not name. Things kept happening that did not quite fit my own story of myself. I would mention a conversation I had had with my mother, and Karen would say, "Oh, Mom told me she found that really hurtful." I had not, in my own memory, said anything hurtful. I would assume I was wrong. Karen was the one in regular contact. She would know. In family arguments, Karen was always the mediator. She always sided with neither party, in a way that turned out, on inspection, to be specific. The things she had said to soothe me had often been gently critical of my parents. The things she had said to soothe my parents had often been gently critical of me. I had not noticed for 25 years that these 2 streams of mediation existed, and that they did not, when assembled, agree with each other. I had not assembled them. There was no reason to. They were happening in 2 different rooms. Until the morning Karen's husband Patrick handed me a sticky note with a password on it. Patrick called me in late September, 5 months after Karen died. He sounded tired. He said, "Maggie, I have been trying to handle her email account. She had so many clients. There are people who don't know yet that she is dead. I can't get through it. Would you take it for a while? Just to write back to people?" Just to wind down her professional inbox? She used a password manager. "I have the master password. I'll give it to you." I drove over that Saturday. Patrick met me at the door of the small Cape Cod house Karen had loved. He had aged in 5 months in the way men age when their wives die suddenly. Not in his hair, not in his face, but in the way he held his shoulders. We sat at the dining room table. He gave me the sticky note. He showed me the laptop. He showed me the password manager. He showed me Karen's Gmail. He said, "Just the work folder. The work folder is the one I need cleaned out. Everything else, you can leave alone or you can look at it. She would have trusted you. I trust you. Just be gentle with yourself." I took the laptop home. I worked through the work folder for 3 weekends. I wrote tactful messages to consulting clients. I forwarded handovers to her former coworkers. I closed accounts. I canceled subscriptions. I was, in the cold professional way of a woman who has been quietly grieving in public for 5 months, very efficient. And the 4th Saturday, I clicked on the folder labeled Family. I did this because there was a thread at the top with a subject line that said, "Mom's birthday, the cake situation," dated the week before Karen died. I thought there might be a recent message there that one of our parents had sent her that I should know about, that would help me write a thoughtful note. The cake situation. It sounded harmless. I opened the thread. The cake situation thread was harmless. There had been a debate about whether to order from the Italian bakery or make the cake at home. Karen had wanted to order. Our mother had wanted homemade. In the last email in the thread, Karen had written, in her measured, warm tone, "Mom, you know I love when you make it. I just don't want you to wear yourself out before Maggie even gets there. She always shows up at the last minute and expects everyone to be in good spirits. Let's just order. I'll pick it up. Love you." I read that sentence 3 times. She always shows up at the last minute and expects everyone to be in good spirits. I had, in fact, arrived at our mother's 74th birthday party last year, 15 minutes before the meal began, because I had been on a parent-teacher call with the mother of a suicidal 8th grader that had run 40 minutes long. I had apologized for being late. My mother had hugged me. Karen had said nothing at the time. The next morning, my mother had called me to ask if everything was all right, because Karen had mentioned that I had seemed stressed and distracted at the party. I had told my mother nothing was wrong. I had hung up and felt the same small confusion I had felt for 25 years. Karen had emailed our mother that the morning of the party. Not, "Maggie has a difficult case at work and is going to do her best to be on time." Not, "nothing." She had written, "She always shows up at the last minute and expects everyone to be in good spirits." 46 words of warm tone wrapped around one sentence of quiet sabotage. I scrolled up in the folder. I scrolled and I scrolled and I scrolled. Karen had been emailing our parents, on average, 4 to 5 times a week since the year 2001. There were thousands of messages. I am not going to read you many of the emails. I want to give you the shape of them because the shape is the point. Most of the emails were, in their broad structure, warm and ordinary. Karen wrote to our parents about her kids' school events. She wrote about her work. She wrote about a recipe she was trying. She wrote about a movie she had seen. The messages were affectionate. They sounded like a loving daughter staying in close touch with her parents in the slow, ordinary way of a long, good relationship. Buried inside the warmth, on average 2 or 3 times a week, was a sentence about me. The sentences were never cruel. They were never accusations. They were never, in any single email, anything you would point to and say, "That's malicious." They were small, soft sentences, the kind you might say without thinking. "Maggie hasn't called in a while. I'm sure she's just busy with her own family." "Maggie said she was coming for Easter, but I'd take it with a grain of salt. You know how she is." "Tom has been weird about money again. Maggie won't say it, but I think they're struggling." "Maggie didn't seem like herself at the party. I wonder if she's dealing with something she hasn't told us." "I tried to invite Maggie to the doctor's appointment with you, but she had a school thing, again." Each sentence, on its own, was nothing. Each sentence, on its own, was a sister who was loosely keeping our parents informed about the sister who lived an hour away and who they did not see as often. Each sentence on its own could have been written in good faith. 23 years of those sentences was a strategy. I want to give you 3 more examples because 3 is the number that turns a single drop of water into a leak. In an email from 2014, Karen had written to our mother, "Maggie sent me a card for my birthday. It was sweet of her," she remembered. I almost forgot to mention, "Mom, did Maggie remember yours last month?" I didn't want to ask her in case the answer was awkward. My mother's birthday is in February. I had sent my mother a card and a $50 gift card to her favorite garden store, mailed 2 weeks early because that year I had been worried about the post office. My mother had called me to thank me. The email had been written 6 days after that phone call. Karen had been quietly establishing in our mother's memory the question of whether I had remembered. The card I had sent was by then on the refrigerator. Karen had been to my parents' house twice that week. She had seen it. In an email from 2018, Karen had written, "Dad, I know you and Mom were thinking about visiting Cleveland for David's birthday. Maggie hasn't said anything to me about whether she's having a party. I'd hate for you both to drive an hour and find out it's a small family thing she's not including you in. Maybe wait until she calls you directly?" I had called my parents the next day to invite them to David's 7th birthday, which had been planned for over a month. They had told me, gently, that they were not sure they could make it. They had not made it. David had asked, that night at bedtime, why Grandma and Grandpa hadn't come. I had not been able to answer. In an email from 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, Karen had written to both our parents. "I just got off the phone with Maggie. She's stressed. The school psychologist thing is overwhelming with everything going on. I told her I'd come over and help with the kids next weekend so she can take a break. Please don't mention this to her. She gets defensive when she thinks I'm telling you guys she's struggling." Karen had not called me that week. Karen had not come over the next weekend. Karen had constructed, with a single email, a private narrative for our parents in which she was the heroic sister bailing me out, and she had armored that narrative against being checked by asking our parents not to mention it to me. I am a school psychologist. I work every day with the children of families where one parent has slowly and steadily turned the other parent into a story the children no longer recognize. The professional name for it is parental alienation. There is no professional name that I know of for what my sister did to me with our parents. I am going to call it sibling alienation, for the lack of a better word. I am going to call it what it was. At about email number 900, in the chronology, sometime around hour 7 of the Saturday I read all of this, I found a thread from April of 2022. The subject line was, "David's college fund, your thoughts?" The first message was from my mother. My mother had written to Karen, not to me, to Karen, that she and my father had been talking, and they had decided they wanted to give my son David $25,000 toward his college tuition. David had been in 10th grade at the time. He was, my mother wrote, a bright kid, and she wanted him to start the financial aid process, knowing his grandparents had set something aside. She asked Karen what she thought. She asked Karen whether Karen thought the money should go to me to give to David, or directly into a trust account for David himself. Karen had written back the next morning. The reply was 3 paragraphs long. The middle paragraph was the one I read 4 times. Karen had written, "Mom, I want to be careful here. Maggie has historically not been great with money she received suddenly. Remember the wedding gift in 2010? You and Dad gave her $5,000 for the wedding expenses, and she ended up using a lot of it on the honeymoon to Italy, which was lovely, but not what you had intended. I worry about doing something similar with David's college money. What if we set up a trust for David that I administer? That way, the money goes directly to him, used for tuition, and Maggie doesn't have the temptation. I love my sister, but you know how she is with money in her hands." I sat at my kitchen table at 8 on a Saturday evening in October, 2 years after the email had been sent, and I tried to remember a wedding gift of $5,000 in 2010. I could not. I remembered, very clearly, my parents giving me $500 for the wedding, in a card, 2 weeks before the ceremony. I remembered being grateful. I remembered telling my mother on the phone how it had paid for the photographer's deposit. I did not remember $5,000. I had never seen $5,000 from my parents. There had never been $5,000. I read further. My mother had written back, 2 days after Karen's reply, that the trust idea sounded sensible. The money was placed, in May of 2022, into a trust administered by Karen. I knew nothing about this. David knew nothing about this. The money, when I followed up later that month, was still sitting in the trust. Karen had not yet released any of it. She had died before David turned 17. The trust, on Karen's death, had been retitled into Patrick's name, since he had been the secondary administrator. Patrick had had no idea what was in it. Neither, when I called my mother in November to talk about it, had my mother. She had not been able to remember, when I gently asked, whether they had ever told me about the trust. She had said very softly, "We must have. I'm sure we must have." They had not. The trust had been a quiet gift from my parents to my son, routed around me on the basis of a wedding gift I had never received. I told Tom that night. I closed the laptop at 1 in the morning. I went upstairs. He was reading in bed. I sat on the edge of the mattress and I told him, very plainly, what I had read. I told him about the cake email. I told him about the pattern. I told him about the $25,000. Tom listened. Tom is not a man who reacts quickly. When I finished, he was quiet for almost a full minute. Then he said, "Maggie, I have been wondering for 20 years why your mother always looks at me the way she does. I always assumed I had said something at our second Christmas that she had never forgiven me for. I think I had a sister-in-law I never met. I have been married for 18 years to a woman whose mother had been told a different version of my wife since she was 21. I cried then, not at the emails, at Tom, at the small, accurate sentence he had given me, in our bed at 1 in the morning, that named what I had been living inside of for 25 years. I have been married for 18 years to a woman whose mother had been told a different version of my wife. We did not sleep that night. We sat in bed and talked until the sky got pale. I made him coffee at 5. He went to school at 7. I went to my study and I made a copy of every email in the family folder, organized by year, onto a hard drive that I labeled and put in our fireproof safe. Then I drove to my therapist's office at 10 and asked her receptionist for an emergency appointment. My therapist, a woman named Dr. Aronson, has been my therapist for 12 years. She has known me, in the careful way a good therapist knows a client, longer than my husband has. She listened to the story across 2 90-minute sessions. She helped me make a plan. The plan was not confrontation. The plan was, in Dr. Aronson's words, controlled disclosure. I would say nothing about the pattern. I would say nothing about Karen's general behavior. I would, instead, raise, calmly, one at a time, over months, 2 or 3 specific things I had now learned were true, and let my parents discover the rest themselves if they were ready to. Not to protect Karen. Karen did not need protecting. But because my parents were in their late 70s, and they had just buried their older daughter, and the most loving thing I could do for them, and for myself, was not to dismantle their entire image of her in one conversation. The dismantling, if it was going to happen, had to happen at their own pace, and it had to be theirs. I waited 3 months. I spent those 3 months changing the shape of my own contact with my parents. I started calling my mother twice a week instead of once. I stopped routing news through Karen's old habits. I invited my parents to our house for dinner 3 times in those 3 months. They had not been to our house in 2 years. I let my children become the people who spent time with my parents, without Karen's narration in between. I did not say anything about what I had read. I simply made myself present, in a steady, undramatic way, for 90 consecutive days. On a Sunday in late January, 8 months after Karen had died, my mother and I were doing dishes together at her kitchen sink. She was washing, I was drying. I said very gently, with my eyes on the dish in my hand, "Mom, I want to ask you about something small. Do you remember in 2010, before our wedding, do you remember giving Tom and me money for the wedding?" My mother said brightly, "Oh, sure, we gave you $5,000. It was supposed to help with the venue. Karen said you and Tom used most of it on the honeymoon, which was all right in the end, of course." She kept washing. I did not say anything for a moment. Then I said, "Mom, you gave us $500 in a card 2 weeks before the wedding. It paid for the photographer's deposit. I remember it very clearly because it was so sweet. There was no 5,000. My mother stopped washing. She turned off the water. She did not turn to face me. She said quietly, "Are you sure, honey?" I said, "Mom, I'm sure. I have the card you gave us. It is in a box in our basement. It is a birthday card you converted into a wedding card because you couldn't find a wedding one. It has $500 written inside in your handwriting. Please don't be upset. I have been thinking about a few things lately, and I wanted to ask." My mother turned. Her face was the face of a woman who had been, slowly over the last few months, putting a few pieces together on her own, and was only now, in this moment at her own kitchen sink, beginning to understand the shape of the picture. She said, "Maggie, honey, sit down. We need to talk." We sat at the kitchen table for the next 3 hours. My father came in halfway through. He sat down. He listened. I told them, one piece at a time, the 3 things I had decided to bring: the wedding money, the college trust for David, one other thing, a misunderstanding about a family vacation in 2017 that had cost me 3 years of believing my parents had not wanted me there. Karen had told them I had decided not to come. She had told me they had not invited Tom. Both versions had been wrong. I did not bring out the hard drive. I did not show them the volume of what I had read. I told them only the 3 things, slowly, with documentation. I told them I was not asking them to do anything. I told them I had needed them to know. My father, who had not said anything for 2.5 hours, finally spoke. He said, "Maggie, I am going to be very honest with you for a minute. I have been having a quiet thought for the last few months since Karen died. I have been noticing, in our conversations with you, that you are not the daughter we had been told about. I had been pushing the thought away because Karen was dead, and the thought felt disloyal. I am going to stop pushing it away. I am so sorry, Maggie. I should have known you better. I am your father. I should have known." My mother cried. My father did not cry. He is not a man who cries, but his hands shook in his lap, and he sat very still, and at one point he reached across the table and held my hand for a very long time. I did not give them the rest of the emails. I have not, 2 years later, given them the rest of the emails. The 3 things were enough. The rest is for me and Dr. Aronson, and a hard drive in a fireproof safe. This was 2 years ago. My relationship with my parents now is different. It is also smaller in some ways, because the bridge I had been told existed, the bridge Karen had been maintaining between us, turned out to be a bridge Karen had been quietly removing planks from for 2 decades. We are rebuilding the bridge ourselves now, plank by plank. It is slower work. It is also, for the first time in my adult life, real work, between the 3 of us, without a translator in the middle. My mother calls me every Tuesday morning. My father has been to David's last 6 soccer games. They came to Lily's piano recital in May. They had not been to one of her recitals since she was 6. I think about Karen often. I have decided over the last 2 years not to hate her. I have decided to do something harder. I have decided to grieve her honestly. The sister I thought I had did not exist. The sister I actually had was a person who, for reasons I will never fully understand because she is no longer here to explain them, spent 25 years quietly competing with me for the love of 2 people who had enough love for both of us. She did not know that. Or she did not believe it. Or she had been told something, by some voice inside herself, that I will never get to hear. She was, in the end, a person who needed our parents' love so much that she could not bear to share it. That is a kind of poverty. I would not wish it on anyone. I have, after 2 years, found it in myself to be sad about it instead of angry. I am not sad enough to delete the hard drive. The hard drive sits in the safe. The hard drive is not for revenge. The hard drive is for the version of me, 2 or 3 years from now, who will start to wonder, on some quiet Sunday, whether she had imagined the whole thing. That version of me will open the safe. She will read 3 emails. She will close the safe. She will remember. The thing I want to say to anyone listening who is sitting inside a family that does not quite make sense to them, the daughter who has always felt slightly off, the sibling who has always been described as difficult by everyone except themselves, is this: look for the translator. Look for the person in the family who is always explaining you to other family members and other family members to you. Look for the person who is always gently telling you that someone is really hurt, or really worried, or didn't mean it the way it sounded. Look for the person who is always the one your parents call first. That person may be a translator out of love. That person may also be a translator out of need. There is no easy way to tell from the inside. The way to tell sometimes is to remove the translator and see what your relationships look like without her. I did not get to remove my translator. She removed herself. I would not wish her death on anyone, even, in the worst moments, on myself. But the year after she died, when I had no one mediating between me and my parents for the first time in my adult life, I started to find out who my parents were. I started to find out who I was. The translator was gone. The language was, slowly, beginning to be ours again. If this story landed for you, drop the word inbox in the comments below. I read them. It tells me which stories are worth telling next. Subscribe for new stories, real patterns, full narratives, the long game. 2 small pieces of wisdom from this one before I go. First, when one person in a family is always the one explaining everyone else, ask yourself what version of you is being explained, and to whom, and whether you have ever sat in either of those rooms without the explainer present. Most adults have not. Most adults assume the translator is doing love. The translator is, sometimes, also doing other things. The only way to know is to spend time by yourself with the people on the other side of the translation. Second, do not throw away the hard drive. Not for revenge, for witness. There will come a day, 2 or 3 years after a difficult truth, when the part of you who lived inside the lie for a long time will start to whisper that you must have imagined it. The hard drive is the answer to that whisper. The hard drive is for her. Take a breath. I'll see you in the next one.